Well, hello there, long time no Evoker. What? This has been a class that we haven't touched in probably a couple of months now, ever since it was released on the alpha, since it was the first class that we tested, taking a look at, and you've seen how many changes have happened to all the regular specs and classes that we've known for years, and you can bet your butts that Devastation has also received a bunch of updates, considering how the spec has been performing over the course of alpha and beta and going forward. And since the Blizzard Blue Post gods have announced that design is pretty much over and now they're just looking at tuning, we thought it was a good way to start looking at the general finalized versions of the specs by looking at Devastation again, and that's what we will be talking about today. Before that, make sure you check our Patreon link down below, because by going into our Patreon page and deciding if you want to support us or not, we'll actually go into helping us make videos on a daily basis the way that we do. And if you like these types of videos, you can consider becoming one of the different tiers of Patreon depending on what possibilities you have, and anything is more than appreciated and welcome. You might actually have some goodies in restore, and you will be supporting all of the videos that we do on specs, with the TLFs, with the podcast, with the weekly main series videos and the streams, and more video series to come in the future. It definitely helps us out a lot, and we super appreciate it for you. Thank you. And let's talk Devastation. Now, depends if you have been keeping tabs on the new talent tree. Devastation has received some changes since last we looked at it, and it's not a lot, but basically fixes, since it is the new class. It gets everybody thinking like, oh, is this gonna work out well? How is it looking? First of all, without further ado, the general talent tree hasn't changed too much. You can see Scarlet Adaptation has been slightly nerfed, because it was actually overperforming a lot, at least in the initial logs, but we can assume tuning will come more in the future. Ancient Flame has been moved a little higher to the right, so you can actually benefit from the Living Flame cast time reduction earlier in the talent tree, but it's still kind of like a dead-end talent. In its place, you have Panacea. What? That makes Emerald Blossom heal you instantly, which is kind of good because sometimes you want those heals on demand, especially if you are playing the DPS spec and you don't really have the mindset of like, okay, I'm prepping to heal myself in a couple of seconds. Because usually as a DPS, you want to react quick so you can go back to DPSing. So this is a pretty good addition. And another new addition is Walloping Blow that has been added right under Extended Flight in case you want more utility for your Wing Buffet. Basically, what Walloping Blow does is makes your Wind Buffet and Tail Swipe, the two big racial utility abilities, knock enemies further and daze them, reducing the movement speed by 70% for 4 seconds. This obviously has applications in PvE and, of course, in PvP as well, but this is really good if you want to double down on that racial utility. Another new addition, insofar as where it is placed in the talent at the very least, is Regenerative Magic, and has been added under Source of Magic, and now has a somehow reverse beacon from Holy Paladin type mechanic. When you are under 50% HP, 10% of the healing that the target of your Source of Magic receives also goes to you. So that's kind of good. It works into that sustain, so it's pretty nice. Now, pretty much everything else is the same. Let's actually take a look more in depth at the spec talent tree, which we could argue that it was receiving a lot of reworks. It's been going on for the last couple of months, I believe. We didn't really cover every new addition, since we were really looking into all the new specs that were going to be added, but now it's a good as time as any to see what, let's say, the final version of Devastation would look like. We don't think that there's going to be any other new important changes. So first of all, just to quickly clear it out, the left-hand side is still the red-focused part of the talent tree, while the right-hand side is the blue-focused part of the talent tree. Overall, in terms of design, blue is supposed to be the single target potential raid side of the talent, while red is, let's say, more AoE, potentially Mythic Plus. And I say potentially because you can definitely have combinations between the two sides and, kind of make a hybrid build, or go really heavy into red and take a couple of key blue spells, or vice versa and things like that. So you can definitely cater it to your particular playstyle and to your damage profile. So we'll see how that turns out. And the best example for that is probably the Charge Blast talent, which is kind of like on the right-hand side, and it makes your blue spells increase the damage of your next pyre by 5%, stacking up to 20 times. Obviously, Pyre is just only one of the red spells, but there are different synergies in the red spells that take into consideration Pyre. And if you are fighting, let's say, I'm thinking, you know, you're in a Mythic Plus dungeon, you're killing the bosses, you're doing a lot of blues, and then occasionally you want to shoot out a Pyre afterwards, then it just explodes. So that's a pretty neat synergy. And speaking of blue, the first iconic spell that you'll probably get is Eternity Surge, which prior to this was really down low in the talent tree. Now it's pretty accessible very quickly before the first gate. And what Eternity Surge does is if you haven't seen Devastation or any of the Evoker class specs just yet, it takes into consideration the channel mechanic, where you channel it, and for each channel stage that you have, it gets in power. So first of all, it deals decent amount of damage to one target. Actually does a lot of damage. And if you channel it on for the first level, it hits 2 enemies, then 4 enemies, 5 enemies, 6 enemies, depending if you have the talent tree, the Eternity Span talent as well. So it increases the amount of targets that it hits, which is, you know, it's a strong single target nuke, but also can be used for cleave. And seeing as how the channel version of it just increases the target count, if you are in single target, you don't really have to channel it for very long. Just get the one stage and just blast it out. Arcane Intensity is also still there. The Disintegrate damage increase is still a 2-pointer, which, but it is 16% more damage on Disintegrate, and Disintegrate does a lot of single target damage. And it's kind of like on a choice node, but not really choice node, with with Lay Waste, which increases the damage of Deep Breath by 10 and 20%. So you kind of have to take one of the two to keep going down, and it's very likely that you'll probably take Arcane Intensity. Or both, who knows? Further down, you will see Essence Attunement, which increases the Essence Bursts to stack to 2. Essence Burst is kind of a core mechanic to the playstyle of Devastation and Preservation as well. Essence Burst makes it so that your spells that are essentially filler type spells give you Essence Burst, making your next essence consuming ability, in this case Disintegrate, be free. They definitely not cost anything, because outside of the overall mana, you do have essences as a mechanic, which are basically kind of like combo points or holy power that you consume for each spell, and each spell consumes a different amount of essences, and getting this essence burst will make it particularly cool to, you know, cast your big consumers without them having to, you know, cost anything, because you can stack it up to 2 times, so you don't essentially waste. Because normally if you don't take this, once you get an essence burst proc, you kind of really want to consume it right away so that you don't particularly waste future essence burst procs. And from this particular talent node, it will split into 3 ways, depending on exactly what you want to get. I mentioned before Eternity Span. What this does is makes Eternity Surge and Shattering Star, which is a further talent down the road, hit twice as many targets. Obviously, this functions really well in Cleave. It's a dead end, but it's a good talent, especially if you are heavy into blue and you want to make sure that, I don't know, every now and again you slap the boss ads if you're in a raid and we have ads, or if you just want to play blue in dungeons and you want to make sure that you maximize the potential of Cleave. And it will also synergize really well with Scintillation, which is a talent way down the talent tree. And what Scintillation does is makes Disintegrate have a 15%, if you put the 2 points in, 50% chance when it deals damage to launch a level 1 Eternity Surge at 60% of its power. Now, what this means is that when you channel into the one target, you launch, you know, normally an Eternity Surge that deals damage to that target, but if you do have Eternity Span, it will hit 2 targets. So you can essentially channel Disintegrate in Cleave situations. Once again, this being an interesting and very good mechanic in Raid, since we do know that whenever there is a spec that heavily focuses on single target, it hardly ever has a way to deal properly with Cleave. And, you know, a good example of this would probably been Marksman, who has, or basically Sub-Rogue, who cannot deal with low amount of targets outside of a specific number that activates their AoE. 3 for Marksman and, you know, 5 or more for Sub, or whatever it turns out to be in Dragonflight. With that out of the way, we can basically make sure that even if you do channel into single target, if you do get those builds, you have a way to also hit in Cleave, which is particularly good. Now, there's a choice node further up than we mentioned before, and that's Eye of Infinity versus Casualty. God damn it. These names, man. And this used to be a dead-end node, but now it's a choice node. So basically, Eye of Infinity makes Eternity Surge Critical Strike grant you Essence Burst, which we mentioned before, the core mechanic of the spec. While Casualty, god damn it, man. Essence abilities reduces the remaining cooldown of Eternity Surge by 1 second, with Eternity Surge having a base cooldown of 30 seconds. And with all these Essence Burst mechanics and essence mechanics as a whole going into your rotation. This kind of gives you that nice little synergy. And this will go out into Shattering Star just underneath it. And this is, I think this was renamed from Charge Blast, which Charge Blast is now a talent on the left side of it. Shattering Star essentially is an instant spell with a 15-second cooldown, and you exhale a bolt of concentrated power from your mouth, as the tooltip would imply, and it deals decent amount of damage and lowers the target's defense, increasing the damage that it takes from you by 20% for 4 seconds, and it also generates 1 essence. While Charge Blast on the left that I mentioned, your blue spells increase the damage of your pyre by 5%, it stacks up to 20 times, and this is basically goes into the Dragon Rage synergy, where Dragon Rage is your main DPS cooldown, and when you press Dragon Rage, you launch 3 pyres in AoE. And so far, by how the talent seems to be designed so far, those pyres will be empowered. So that's massive burst damage, either in single target or in AoE, kind of works both ways. But unfortunately, to get the Rage, you'll have to go through utility talents once again, and maybe that's not too bad, but it is the only way to get Dragon Rage. It's either if you pick Inner Radiance, which Inner Radiance increases your Living Flame and Emerald Blossom healing on yourself by 30%, or at least they make it 30% more effective, and or Inner Presence, the cooldown reduction by 20 seconds on your Interrupt, which, I mean, yeah, as a ranged DPSer, you might want your Interrupt to be on a shorter cooldown, but then again, so many healers, except priests, are getting interrupts nowadays that will we actually need that much interrupts? So it's kind of like, you know, a situational choice node. You are forced to get into it to get a DPS cooldown, so maybe it's not that bad. Who knows? Maybe the devs just want to make sure that you have some kind of survivability options, either if you kick more often or heal yourself better. You can also no longer reduce the cooldown of Dragon Rage, which was a mechanic prior to the current iteration of Devastation, but with the addition of Animosity, which is a talent just underneath it, you can actually extend the duration of Dragonflight by Dragon Rage by 6 seconds when you cast an empowered spell. And I mean, maybe this is better because Dragon Rage is a definitely really nice cooldown, and maybe having it for a longer period of time will overall net you more results. Underneath it, you will have Titanic Wrath, which makes Essence Burst increase the damage of the affected spells by 15% if you put the 2 points in. Again, more synergy for the Essence Burst type playstyle. And it will keep going down into Tyranny, which I believe, if I'm not mistaken, last time it was a capstone, or at least close to the bottom of the talent tree. And now it's obviously more accessible. And the cool part of Tyranny is that it was a talent that you would have always wanted, and now actually paths to all of the capstones down below. And it pretty much still does the same. During Deep Breath and Dragon Rage, you gain the maximum benefit of your Mastery Giant Killer, regardless of the target's breath, because the target's health, because that's how the Mastery functions in relation to your target's HP levels. And if you keep following the path alongside the right-hand side, where the blue spells are, you will get to Spellweaver's Dominance, which makes your damaging critical strikes deal 220% damage, rather than the 200% damage. So instead of doing double, it deals that and 20% more, which is good. Kind of reminds me of Elemental, where Elemental crit spells do also more damage. And it will also lead into Power Swell, a 2-point talent that makes casting an empowered spell increase the essence regeneration rate by 100% for 4 seconds if you have the 2 points in, functioning into your resource generation. It's really good, and depending on how much value your essence consumers will turn out to be, this might be a pretty important talent to pick in most situations, even if you path on the left-hand side, but we will see exactly when proper tuning is in place. And this will lead into Iridescence, which is the capstone all the way down on the right-hand side that makes casting an empowered spell increase the damage of your next 2 spells of the same color by 15% within 10 seconds. Obviously, a buff that works into your rotation that you will have to manage and take into consideration. It's a capstone. Maybe it's a boring capstone, maybe not, but it does add a flavor to the rotation that makes the spec more interesting. And of course, like I mentioned, you can also take Scintillation that I thought discussed a little bit before, where Disintegrate has a 50% chance to make it shoot out a level 1 Eternity Surge, and if you put the 2 points in, it's at 60% the power, which of course is really cool when you channel to constantly blast. It's a little bit RNG, but hey, you know, we're not new to RNG here. And down to the bottom, you have Cascading Power as the middle capstone, which makes Essence Burst have a 20% chance to not be consumed, so more instant spell consumers. This will add some dynamic to your rotation economy, your resource economy, and how you manage your essences, because you have essence regeneration and now you have essence burst that makes spells not consume essences, and and not to mention, even if it does not consume essence burst, you might not even consume the buff, which is probably just shooting back-to-back eternity surges or back-to-back pyres. So that's a cool mechanic because, well, at least pyre is instant, so that's really awesome. And that adds some fun and fast-paced additions to the playstyle. And another talent that leads into the Cascading Power is Imminent Destruction. And this talent makes empower spells reach maximum level 10% quicker, 20% with the 2 points in. This is a mechanic that we had before. I don't know if it had this exact same name, it must have been renamed. But this is something that works into the empowerment system where you have to channel for a certain time and get all that levels up. Might be better for red, which is probably why it's on the left-hand side, since you will have Fire Breath, that's a core empowered ability in AoE, while as with Eternity Surge, statistically you'll probably use it for one charge to get that single target damage, since that's probably why you would be on the left-hand side and casting Eternity Surge. There's also Onyx Legacy that actually enables these two talents if you do want to path from the middle, and this will reduce the cooldown of deep breaths by 1 minute. So this is basically the charge in front and blast everything with fire, with like the dragon breath. I say fire, but dragon breath all around, the cool, you know, iconic ability. Power Nexus is also all the way up into the talent tree on the left hand side, which increases the maximum amount of essence to 6. It's slightly on the red hand side, which is kind of okay because pyre consumes 3 essences, so you can essentially fire 2 back-to-back pyres if you're on full essence, and this is really cool. It just makes the spec flow a little bit better. And you'll have the choice note of Engulfing Blaze and Ruby Embers, which has been moved up and made a little bit more accessible, and we'll see exactly how this turns out. What they do essentially is Ruby Embers makes Living Flame the filler for red spells, deal damage over 12 seconds or restore health over 12 seconds, so it does a dot or a hot depending on who you use it on. And Engulfing Blaze, the other choice, makes Living Flame deal 40% increased damage and healing, but its cast time is increased. This was an option before, it's just present a little bit earlier into the talent tree, and it can synergize decently with other options in the talent row. Burnout has been recently changed, which is way down, and this gives Fire Breath a chance to cause your next Living Flame be instant cast and stacking up 2 times. So essentially, if you do take the increased cast time, that will probably be mitigated a little bit more by being instant when you do damage with Fire Breath. And you also have Leaping Flames that synergizes this really well, which is a talent in the general talent tree for the extra cleave, depending on how many targets you've charged and hit with Fire Breath. Firestorm and Snapfire are still there, and they're not dead-end talent choices anymore. They, you know, path properly, since if you are here on the red hand side of the talent tree, you will want to get Firestorm, which might not seem like a lot of damage right now, even though damage is, you know, tuned out, but it is an AoE ability that is not target capped. So we think about Flame Strike for Fire Mage, for instance. And with Snapfire, makes Living Flame have a 12% chance to reset the cooldown of Firestorm and make your next one instant and deal 40% increased damage, because this is a cast time similar again to Flame Strike. It's not a charge cast time, it's not an empowered spell, but it does have a baseline 2 seconds cast, and you know, having an instant and deal more damage is really good for that massive Mythic plus multi-pools mechanics. And you'll also have Feed the Flames, which will most likely always be taken as a capstone. It's all the way on the bottom left-hand side, since it makes Consuming Essence Burst reduce the remaining cooldown of Fire Breath by 2 seconds, which is really good. Or the alternative, Burning Flame, which makes red spells extend the duration of your Fire Breath damage over time by 1 second. Now, this, I don't remember if this was initially a choice node before, but it's good that it's kind of like a choice node because they don't really work with each other. It's mostly down to simming to see exactly how well these work, because it depends exactly on what you want more. Do you want the burst of the instant damage from Flame Breath, or do you want the dots to be more empowered? Do you want to spend it? That comes down to the uptime on the debuff, to be precise. And one of the last things that I didn't mention, and it is a talent that actually goes down into this side of the capstone, that's Font of Magic. That'll most likely be taken in pretty much all builds because your Empower spell's maximum level is increased by 1, making the entire fantasy gimmick of the class better by giving it 1 level. And I can see this being used for blues as well. Now, the class is basically changed. It's kind of like a little bit contentious at this time because a lot of people have some problems with its core mechanics. There's definitely pros and cons. I personally love it. It's an exciting new class. It's a new way of playing a DPS caster, let's say, right? It's range caster. And the range is constantly being addressed by Blizzard, so we will see exactly if we're going to be remaining at 25-yard range or if we're going to be moved to 30-yard range. I know they've addressed this in a recent post, I think, for preservation. We'll see exactly how this works out in the future because I personally thought it was really interesting to have a 25-yard range DPSer and healer. We'll see exactly how this turns out, but Devastation is looking really fun. If you want to try something new and you want to have your tables flip, then play Devastation in Dragonflight. Thank you for watching the video. Thank you, dear patrons, for supporting the content, and see you in the next one. Bye.
I've been loving it then, I still love it now. Still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. Getting better every day, let me show you how. Cause still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. It's getting harder to stay, but at the end of the day, it's a guilty pleasure, so just log in and play. Whether it's classical retail, I'ma do a /bow. Still, I play WoW.